Well, welcome back, everyone. I think we're going to get started momentarily on our fourth session of the day. Well, welcome back, everyone, to session 4 today for our conference, The Idea of the Catholic University in the 21st Century. My name is Father Sean Dempsey. I'm a Jesuit here at Loyola Marymount University, and I'm assistant professor in the history department here, and it's a great honor and privilege to be helping moderate this particular session. I'll just briefly introduce our 3 panelists who will be presenting a really interesting range of papers today. On my left is actually Dr. Daniel Rober from Sacred Heart University, but Dr. Rober is actually presenting for his colleague, Michelle Loris, who unfortunately can't be with us for the conference. So I'll actually introduce her and her paper because he will be speaking in the voice of Michelle today. So her paper is Realizing the Catholic Identity of a Catholic University. Michelle Loris is a professor and the Associate Dean of Curriculum and Special Projects for the College of Arts and Sciences at Sacred Heart University. She received her doctorate in American Literature from Fordham, one of our great Jesuit schools, along with a doctorate in Clinical Psychology from Antioch, New England Graduate School of Professional Psychology. At Sacred Heart, she is the faculty advisor for Sigma Tau Delta, the Student International English Honor Society, and one of the faculty football mentors. The Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and the Council for Advancement and Support of Education named Dr. Loris the 2013 Connecticut Professor of the Year. And again, her paper is titled Realizing the Catholic Identity of a Catholic University. So with that, Dr. Rober has Dr. Loris.
Thank you for your introduction, my esteemed colleague. You all are going to get very sick of my voice by the end of our proceedings because I will be also on 2 panels tomorrow. So appearing as myself. So, but for those of you who have not met my chair and colleague, Michelle Loris, you will rarely find someone as dedicated to a university as Michelle is to Sacred Heart. I just have to say that. She has worked there for a number of years, is an alum of the school, extremely dedicated to the university, to its mission, and to the students. And the program that I'm about to describe, that she's about to describe, is very much the product of her blood, sweat, and tears. So that begin. In Catholic higher education today, there is much discussion about how to maintain a robust and distinctive Catholic identity in our colleges and universities. This topic is an important one because at our universities, we see that the trend among our students is toward more secularization, toward the kind of reductionism we discussed this morning. Many of our students today identify as agnostic, or spiritual but not religious, as unchurched, as nuns. In many ways, they are indifferent to any institutional religion and unconvinced of any enduring or universal morality. As for their motives and goals for attending college, they are focused on getting a degree, and one that will result in gainful employment, not so much on becoming a knowledgeable and educated person. Studies in the humanities, for example, are often seen as irrelevant to students' career goals. And if such courses are part of a core curriculum, they are perceived as courses to check off, as completed only to be able to move forward to the more relevant courses in the major. In the online world they inhabit, our students are primed for quick responses, just the facts, and they most often prefer knowledge captured in 30 characters or less. In higher education journals, we see plenty of articles telling us that the humanities are in crisis or irrelevant. Many of our faculty, too, are focused only on a specialized area of their study and their disciplines, and they are less concerned about how this area of study may contribute to Catholic thought. Often, much of their scholarship relates to particular political concerns within their discipline or within the university, rather than to an understanding of how knowledge may be integrated toward the truth. In fact, in a postmodern world, to many faculty, the very idea of an objective truth or reality, or a metaphysical claim, is argued against. Reality and truth are seen as purely subjective, relative, dependent upon perspective. So not unlike our students, many of our faculty tend towards secularization. They are not committed to the development of or engagement with Catholic intellectual life. So in such a context, we need to ask, what is the idea of a Catholic university and how can we sustain its Catholic identity? We need to determine how we can bring Catholic intellectual life across the disciplines and place Catholic intellectual life at the heart of a Catholic university. One response for us at Sacred Heart University has been to develop a curriculum that focuses on Catholic thought and enduring questions about humanity, and to seek out and cultivate a faculty who recognize the value and vigor of Catholic intellectual life. Sacred Heart University, a lay-staffed and lay-led comprehensive Catholic university rooted in the Catholic intellectual tradition, has determined that one way to distinguish a Catholic university is first to place Catholic thought and Catholic thinkers, writers, and artists at the center of an engaging interdisciplinary conversation about fundamental and enduring humanistic questions that have no quick answers, require thoughtful reflection, and foster open inquiry and a free exchange of views and ideas, and second, to put a dedicated faculty at the head of this curriculum. So first, the curriculum. We call our required two-semester Common Core the Human Journey Seminars, great books in the Catholic intellectual tradition. Their nickname is the CIT Seminars. These two seminars are the university's academic signature core, and they directly reflect the university's mission, which is rooted in the Catholic intellectual tradition. We define the Catholic intellectual tradition as a 2,000-year-old, ongoing, interdisciplinary conversation between the great Catholic thinkers, writers, and artists, and the cultures in which they live, asking questions about God, humanity, society, and nature. The aim of these core seminars is to engage our students in this ongoing conversation by discussing the authors and works they read in class, and by relating what they read to their lives and to the contemporary issues of their world. These two seminars are housed in and offered through the Department of Catholic Studies. Over the course of 2 semesters, students get an overview of the roots and development of the Catholic intellectual tradition. We have subtitled the first semester, The Journey to God, the second semester, The Journey to the World. In our 2 custom-designed textbooks, let me just take a second to exhibit those for you. This is the one for the first course, and this is the one for the second course. The common readings are contained the common readings for the first semester, such as the Allegory of the Cave from Plato's Republic. We're using the term Catholic here in a broad sense. Selections from the Old Testament, the Gospel of Matthew, the entire Gospel of Matthew, Augustine's Confessions, selections from Augustine's Confessions, a selection from Aquinas' Summa Contra Gentiles, and selections from Dante's Divine Comedy. To exemplify the journey to the world, the common readings from the second semester begin with Nostra Aetate from the Second Vatican Council, also include selections from Benedict XVI's Caritas in Veritate as a representation of Catholic social teaching, from Thomas Merton's The Seven-Story Mountain, Martin Luther King's Letter from Birmingham Jail, as well as selections from works by John Henry Newman, Gerard Manley Hopkins, Dorothy Day, and Gustavo Gutierrez. So those are the core readings that are required of all students and that all faculty are required to assign. There is an extensive secondary list of authors from which faculty may choose to add to the common readings. We want to include authors who both represent the Catholic intellectual tradition, as well as authors who are in conversation with the tradition, sometimes critically. Thus, in the first semester, faculty may include, for example, writings from mystics such as Julian of Norwich, Hildegard of Bingen, Teresa of Avila, further selections from the Bible, of which the Book of Job would be a common example, Aristotle, again, a very popular example. One could assign selections from Martin Luther, Shakespeare, Maimonides. In the second semester, faculty can add writings from, for example, Flannery O'Connor, Graham Greene, Freud, Nietzsche, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, just as examples. We want to make the seminars as interdisciplinary as possible, so some faculty also include in their seminar selections of art, music, literature, the social sciences, or the sciences that represent the Catholic intellectual tradition or are in conversation with it. The learning outcomes for each seminar require the 4 fundamental questions of human existence frame the seminars, and that claims of the Catholic intellectual tradition be pointed to as these claims emerge from the readings. So these provide kind of a framing for the discussion. The learning outcomes also require that students engage in seminar discussion and that they are led to reflect on how the readings relate to their lives and the world in which they live. The four fundamental questions of human existence which frame the readings and discussion for each seminar are, what does it mean to be human, and what is my relationship to God? So that's the first question. What does it mean to live a life of meaning and purpose? What does it mean to appreciate the natural world? And finally, what does it mean to form a more just society for the common good? The four claims that we include are the existence of a triune God, the sacramental principle, that is, that God can be discovered through nature and reality, the claim that faith and reason are compatible, and the claim of the inviolable dignity of each human person and the necessity of striving for the common good. And these claims are put out there, but of course not asserted in a dogmatic or catechetical sense, but in a conversational sense. They frame the conversation. Over the course of both seminars, students are asked to think about the four fundamental questions and to see where the claims of the tradition might emerge in the texts. At the end of each semester, a common assessment is administered to all sections of the seminars. The common assessment for the first semester seminar requires the students to write an expository essay using at least two of the common authors to discuss one of the claims of Catholic intellectual tradition. And the common expository essay at the end of the second semester asks students to use at least two of the common authors to explain one of the four fundamental questions. So the first assessment requires students to talk about the claims with respect to the kind of ancient and medieval texts, and the second one asks them to talk about the questions with respect to the modern texts. So the next section, seminar pedagogy, the heart of the seminar. The heart, or generating energy, of these two seminars is based upon seminar pedagogy. The aim of these seminars is to have students engage in a close reading of the texts, and then to discuss with each other how these texts' fundamental questions or claims relate to their lives and the world in which they live. These seminars are not content-driven, and they are intentionally non-disciplinary and non-specialized. They are not a theology, philosophy, literature, or history course. They are meant to be interdisciplinary. So somewhat modeled on the St. John's, Annapolis, and Santa Fe Great Books pedagogy approach, the task of the faculty is not to provide historical context or to lecture, but rather to ask generative and provocative questions that will initiate discussion between them, between and among the students. The faculty role is merely to facilitate the conversation wherever it may lead, and have the students reflect on how this material relates to their lives and their world. We offer about 75 sections each semester of these seminars, and we cap each section at 20 students. The classroom is arranged in a seminar structure, so in a circle or rectangle. We ask faculty to have name cards for the students so that they come to know each other, or to have the students make up name cards for themselves. The faculty sits in the seminar circle with the students. So the faculty member might begin the class by citing a short quote from the text and asking a question about the quote to begin the conversation. When a student replies, it is important for the faculty not to reply, but to allow the momentary silence until the next student joins in, and the next, and the next. A question that I, Michelle, interject in a student discussion might be something like, so how does this relate to your personal journey? For example, students in one of my sections were discussing a section of the Confessions. They were doing a fairly good job of analyzing what Augustine was saying in the section of the text under discussion. For more than 20 minutes of discussion, I spoke not at all, except to interject two questions at appropriate times. At one point in the student discussion, when Augustine was talking about the chains that kept him from God, I asked, what are the chains that keep your life down? At another point in the discussion, when the students were discussing what Augustine was saying about free will, I interjected, does free will make your journey more difficult? And is free will necessary for your journey? Much student discussion ensued, and I had very little to say, which is what we want in the seminars. Certainly some students are more quiet or reticent than others. The faculty developed a seminar rubric which we all shared with the students at the beginning of the semester, and we spent a good portion of the first two classes of the semester discussing with students what the seminar is, how seminar works, what is required, and then using a short text to get them actually experiencing seminar discussion. Our students are generally career-minded and are headed to majors in business, the health sciences, and nursing. We recognize they are not rushing into these seminars because they want to read Augustine or Merton. But student evaluations of these seminars confirm the value of the seminar discussion. So each semester, like I'm sure many of your universities do, the university administers standard course evaluations for all courses. A department can add to the standard evaluation questions specific to its program. We add questions specific to our learning outcomes about the 4 questions, about the claims, and about seminar discussion. The evaluations are based upon a 5-point scale, with 5 being the highest. The evaluations for our CIT seminars have been quite good. The most recent compilation of results show that based upon a 56% return rate, or 967 individual student responses, we received ratings of 4.2 to 4.6 on average in these areas. Overall quality of the course, overall quality of instruction, improving ability to think and read critically, ability to learn and understand the claims of the CIT, as well as to understand the 4 framing questions of the seminars, and a 4.7 for seminar discussion. This is averages. Students' qualitative responses are even more important. Students repeatedly write, and these are fairly exact quotes from the evaluations. They love the seminar discussion, they love the open discussion and the ability to express their views, they like the questions discussed, the course made them think deeply or differently or out of the box, the course changed my life, the course made me face hard questions about the purpose of my life, they love relating the material to their lives in the real world, they love the camaraderie and the community of the classroom, the course helped them to think about their faith in a different way, the course helped them to understand their faith. Students' negative responses about the courses usually complain that the course does not relate to their major, or that the readings, particularly in the course with the older texts, are difficult and old, so hard to understand. So I just want to, in the next section, talk about co-curricular events and how these tie into the seminars. So as part of the program, we offer a number of co-curricular activities. So we require students to attend 2 of what we call colloquia each semester, which are effectively usually lectures with a kind of Q&A, but engaged at a student level. Sometimes there are things that are more academic that are co-sponsored with colloquia. So some of the colloquia are offered by outside speakers, and some are done internally. So many faculty will put together colloquia, panels of fellow faculty and whatnot. But for example, of an outside colloquium, we recently had Dr. Jennifer Bestie from College of St. Benedict, St. John's University, who came to speak about her book, College Hookup Culture and Christian Ethics. That was a packed house and a very good Q&A with the students. They were very interested in that. It was impressive because they were very interested in what she had to say. We had a colloquium by a guest speaker on the opioid crisis. We'll be having a Holocaust survivor come to relate her experience at Auschwitz. And again, many of our faculty also plan and offer colloquia on topics of interest to them. So for example, this semester our faculty will be offering a colloquium on secularization. That's what there will be another colloquium that one of our colleagues is organizing on Jean Vanier at L'Arche, somebody who worked with L'Arche. We have also inaugurated the annual Bergoglio lecture series through our department and through the mission office. So we recently had Massimo Fagioli from Villanova speaking on Pope Francis. He gave actually 2 lectures in the course of the day, one on Pope Francis and one on Catholic higher education today, so very related to the themes of our conference. So we work closely with the Office of Mission and Catholic Identity, which also offers a lecture series called Contemporary Catholic Conversations that is also usually co-sponsored with our colloquium series. So we recently had Michael Lee from Fordham University speak on Oscar Romero. We had Roger Haight from Union Theological Seminary talking about science and faith. They also do a lot of things co-sponsored with the College of Nursing and Health Professions about Catholic health professions. In collaboration with the Office of Mission, our faculty have also launched a series of Theology on Tap events for upperclassmen, again presented by Catholic Studies faculty. So these colloquia and lectures give our students a deeper understanding of Catholic thought at the intersection with the wider culture, and they help them see the Catholic intellectual tradition as an ongoing conversation. We also offer a film series each semester, which our CIT faculty curate. These faculty will have their students attend these films sometimes. Some of these films will correspond to books that are being taught in the seminars. So one of our colleagues offers almost every semester the Martin Scorsese version of Silence, because she assigns that in 202. That's an optional assigned reading. We've had Martin Sheen's The Road, the Camino, The Way, sorry, The Way. We didn't do the Cormac McCarthy, The Road. As well as other films. In all, we are developing a curriculum and a series of co-curricular activities which aim to engage our students in the wide breadth of the Catholic intellectual tradition. So, final section, animating the faculty. So this is about faculty development and how this ties into our program. An engaging curriculum or co-curriculum does not take life without a dedicated faculty. So the most important way to keep Catholic intellectual life at the heart of a Catholic university is to develop a faculty who see Catholic intellectual life as a compelling, exciting enterprise which engenders animated and engaging inquiry about the human person and human experience. The faculty who facilitate these seminars at Sacred Heart University come from a variety of disciplines. Many of them hold doctoral degrees. Some have published books and articles in peer-reviewed journals. Well, the majority are Catholic, not all are Catholic, but all of them are dedicated and committed to implementing the vision and purpose of these two seminars. They are immersed in conversations about the text and the pedagogy. They are concerned about the student's human formation with and because of the seminars. These are faculty who attend meetings with energy and passion, who offer many of the co-curricular activities, accompany students to films and museums, attend lectures given by the outside speakers, attend conferences, tying into themes, especially a number of faculty went last year to a conference of on the Catholic Literary Imagination at Fordham, attend weekly faculty development workshops that are put on teaching different texts. And spend 3 days each summer participating in faculty development workshops to sharpen their already formidable talents as seminar teachers. And many of these are adjunct faculty, dedicated adjuncts who are very interested in our courses. Many of them have other professions, but are very interested in our courses, and the students are very dedicated to them, as the numbers show from our student evaluations. These are faculty who have been selected and cultivated to facilitate these seminars. They completed a required 3-day training before being assigned the courses. So every faculty member, including full-time faculty who teach this course, have to do a 3-day training. In fact, the university president went through it himself to kind of demonstrate that this was important. So the 3 days of this training are spent on reading and discussing articles about the Catholic intellectual tradition, reading about and then practicing seminar pedagogy, discussing assessment, the common readings, and various topics related to seminar pedagogy in general. In the summer, the CIT faculty convened for 3 half-day faculty development workshops. One summer, we had consultants from Columbia University as well as St. John's in Annapolis teaching in these great books programs, those 2 schools leading us in the how-to of seminar pedagogy, and also filling in on some of our authors, particularly Dante and Aquinas, who can be challenging to faculty who aren't trained in those areas previously. During our most recent summer, the faculty refined the assessment instrument, developed a seminar participation rubric, developed the additional authors book list, and developed best practices for conducting the seminars. So this coming summer, we are going to have, as part of our workshop, a morning of discussing the recent publication on Going, Gone, the dynamics of disaffiliation to young Catholics, what might be best practices to respond to these trends among students in terms of engaging their religious worlds where they're at. Faculty also meet twice a semester for what we call a CIT salon. That term was coined by Dr. Michael Higgins from our Mission and Ministry office. For dinner and discussion. So one salon this semester will be with Robert Ellsberg from Orbis Press, discussing Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, as well as his experience with running off the Pentagon Papers for his father. Another salon will be dinner at a talk given by Father Mark Bosco, Vice President of Mission and Identity of Georgetown, on the Catholic intellectual tradition. So to conclude, right, our faculty have dedicated themselves to the educational and moral value of these 2 seminars for our students. They are community scholars whose commitment, passion, and energy are bringing Catholic thought to the center of the university and who are ensuring the vibrancy of the Catholic identity of Sacred Heart University. Together, this curriculum and these extraordinary faculty are helping Sacred Heart University realize its Catholic identity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniel / Michelle. Next up, we have David Gentry-Akin. David is a priest of the Diocese of Stockton, professor of theology at St. Mary's College of California, and his expertise is in Catholicism and culture, philosophy and theology, religion and science, Vatican and the papacy, Catholic higher ed, the Lasallian charism and Catholic education. He holds a pontifical doctorate and licentiate in theology from the Catholic University in Louvain and an MDiv from the University of Notre Dame. And today he's presenting for us his paper entitled, "How Beautiful Are the Footsteps of Those Who Bring Good News."
Thank you so much. Addressing participants in a plenary session of the Congregation for Catholic Education in Rome, Pope Francis said, "Catholic schools and universities are attended by many non-Christian students as well as non-believers. Catholic educational institutions offer everyone an education aimed at the integral development of the person that responds to the rights of all people to have access to knowledge and understanding. But Catholic universities are equally called to offer to all the Christian message, respecting fully the freedom of all and the proper methods of each specific scholastic environment, namely that Jesus Christ is the meaning of life, of the cosmos, and of history." The Holy Father's remark brings to the fore an important question confronting Catholic higher education in the United States in our present moment. How can we be both sufficiently rooted in the Catholic Christian tradition that has provided a wellspring of inspiration for all of the colleges and universities founded in this country over the last 300 or so years, while also being sufficiently open to people of all backgrounds and traditions who seek the opportunity to better themselves, to grow in wisdom, and to encounter the truth in a humanistic context that values the spiritual quest and the contributions that faith traditions generally, and the Catholic faith tradition specifically, can make to the goal of full human flourishing. As we survey the landscape of Catholic higher education in the U.S., on the one hand, we see many institutions, including my own, that have distanced themselves from their founding inspiration to the point that their future may well entail a further secularization. You find sometimes a thin veneer of religiosity, which exists mostly as a remnant of their storied past. One senses that they are institutions of Catholic heritage, but that very little is being done to assure that they will continue to be institutions in which the Catholic intellectual tradition plays a vital role. We might categorize these institutions as being so open to diversity that the historic center of the institution may not survive. On the other hand, we see a few institutions that appear so deeply rooted in the Catholic faith tradition that one finds it hard to imagine that these are places where people of other faith traditions, or of none, would feel welcomed or included. Here one has the sense that the Catholic intellectual tradition will survive, but only by being safeguarded from developments in the wider culture, which one senses might be perceived as threats at those institutions. Navigating this terrain is challenging, to say the least. Some institutions would say that it does not matter whether a faculty member is Catholic or not. A few others would say that it's absolutely essential that their faculty be Catholic. And how is Catholic defined? Is it enough to have been raised Catholic, to be a nominal Catholic, one who occasionally goes to Mass? And even if one is personally a faithful Catholic with a regular spiritual practice, is that enough? It appears that the famous both-and approach of the Catholic intellectual tradition is very much in order here. Catholic institutions, to be worthy of the name, must be players in the dialogue of culture, and that means that we have to attend in equal measure both to being a context for encounter and open dialogue with people of many faith traditions and none, while at the same time attending to the essential task of nurturing the garden of the Catholic intellectual tradition at our institutions. a tradition that we're privileged to be able to cultivate in a faith-based context. We cannot, for the sake of a misguided approach to inclusion that would replace our historic commitment to the Catholic tradition with the idol of a certain style of diversity that will end in little more than relativism. As Pope Francis pointedly notes, we're called to offer to all the Christian message that Jesus is the meaning of life, of cosmos, and of history. Practically speaking, this means that the proclamation of the gospel must be robust on our college campuses, not merely in campus ministry or in the promotion of programs of social justice, but also in our classrooms, in our research, and in the intellectual life of the institution itself. We have an obligation to balance both proclamation and dialogue, to boldly promote the Catholic intellectual tradition on our campuses, and to do so in a way that fully respects the profound dignity of every human person who comes to us in the search for meaning and for a better way of life. On the eve of the start of the conclave that would elect him Pope, Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli, who became Pope John the 23rd, and now Pope St. John the 23rd, famously said in reference to the church, quote, "We are not here to guard a museum, but to cultivate a flourishing garden of life," end quote. The Catholic tradition should not be viewed as if it is analogous to the holdings of a museum, ancient artifacts that need to be preserved so that the people of the future can understand the people of the past. Rather, it is a garden that must be cultivated. And what does a garden require? Good, rich soil, plenty of water, sunlight, and fresh air. The plants in the garden will only be healthy, they will only thrive if they have these necessary conditions. Like the garden, the Catholic tradition must be nurtured, and at a Catholic university, it must be nurtured intellectually. My sense at many of our institutions is that we've opted for theology and religious studies departments that teach a wide variety of subjects related to the field so as to make sure that students from a diversity of backgrounds will feel welcome. And there's nothing wrong with that in principle. Further, the departments of theology and religious studies are increasingly disconnected, at least at my institution, from the rest of the academic life of the institution. So the silo mentality that a number of speakers have already spoken about is very much in place at a place like mine, with large numbers of faculty who have very little exposure to the Catholic intellectual tradition and who've been trained exclusively at secular institutions. These faculty, often highly competent in their fields, are hired by the institution, and they enter into the departmental ghettos that increasingly characterize higher education in the United States. They're often led to believe that beyond refraining from the expression of open hostility toward the Catholic tradition, they have little or no responsibility whatsoever for fostering the Catholic intellectual tradition, for sharing it with their students, or for working to see that the tradition is handed on to the next generation. One of the most common refrains I hear on my own campus is, quote, "Well, I'm not Catholic, but," and then the person goes on to venture an opinion about whatever the topic happens to be, end quote. I would argue that ignorance, even if it is accompanied by goodwill, is not enough to sustain a tradition into the future. So this status quo is not sufficient. The Catholic intellectual tradition is an integrated vision of reality, one in which faith and reason go hand in hand as ways of knowing with their own proper methods and resources which must be fully respected, but complementary ways of knowing nevertheless. As St. Pope John Paul II writes in the preamble to his encyclical Fides et Ratio, faith and reason are like the two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. And God has placed in the human heart a desire to know the truth, in a word, a desire to know themselves, so that by knowing and loving God, women and men may also come to the fullness of truth about themselves. So I want to make two proposals that I think could go a long way towards fostering the vibrancy of the Catholic intellectual tradition at an institution. Some of these things are already going on in some places, and other places haven't even begun the process. But the first thing I want to argue for is a truly interdisciplinary Catholic Studies program. You know, Catholic Studies has been around, that concept or the idea has been around for 20 or 25 years. And in some places, it isn't done very well. Often, Catholic Studies has been sort of a parallel theology department, if you will, staffed by people who aren't happy with what's going on in the theology department. And so they're trying to provide an alternate route and to do real Catholic theology while also thinking that is what is happening in the theology and religious studies department isn't real Catholic theology. So that's not at all the model that I'm endorsing. Rather, what I'm talking about is a truly interdisciplinary Catholic Studies program. And in this kind of a program, philosophy and theology would be at the very heart of the endeavor. But they would be seen as the engines trying to elicit interest and participation from everyone else across the university. People in the English department, the history department, the natural and social sciences, the professions, in all of those departments. So not something that is in competition with theology, but something animated by philosophy, orchestrated by theology, and aimed at reviving and offering to our young people in realistic, healthy, hopeful, and forward-looking ways a more dynamic expression of Catholic culture. In his remarks to the bishops of the United States during his apostolic visit in 2008, Pope Emeritus Benedict said, quote, "I believe that the Church in America, at this point in her history, is faced with the challenge of recapturing the Catholic vision of reality and presenting it in an engaging and imaginative way to a society which markets any number of recipes for human fulfillment. I think in particular of our need to speak to the hearts of young people who, despite their constant exposure to messages contrary to the gospel, continue to thirst for authenticity, goodness, and truth." As I've studied the problem of how we can realistically acknowledge all of the developments of the post-Vatican II era and respect the achievements that have come about as a result, while at the same time seeking to assure that the Catholic tradition continues to hold a privileged place in our institutions, it seems to me that these kinds of programs offer the best hope for moving forward, and this for at least 5 reasons. Number 1, they offer a context in which the Catholic tradition can be studied from many angles and disciplinary perspectives, a context which implicitly acknowledges that Catholicism is a way of life, not just a religious practice, a philosophy of life that includes at its very center religious belief and practice, but which goes way beyond religion, narrowly defined, to embrace the whole of reality. For example, the very first course that students in the Catholic Studies program, I think it's probably the premier program in the country, at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, is entitled The Search for Happiness. Now, if we were all to search our college catalogs, how many times would we see a course called The Search for Happiness? Not very often, I think. How often do students encounter a course title like that? The title and course description make it clear that Catholicism is about much more than discrete religious practices, attending Mass on Sunday or abstaining from meat on the Fridays of Lent. Number 2, they offer students the possibility of engaging the tradition amidst the cacophony of voices and movements and schools of thought that are competing for their attention in a way that is clear, persuasive, integral, and unapologetic. Number 3, and this is what I think really is the most important thing that these programs have to offer. They offer faculty, whether they are personally Catholic or not, an opportunity to explore the richness of the Catholic intellectual tradition and its possible connections to and implications for their own disciplines. Number 4, they offer academic leaders a way forward, a way to ensure the survival of the Catholic tradition at their institutions, without having to embark, at least right away and with few resources and a lack of clarity about how to proceed, on the much larger and more ambitious task of trying to shift the entire culture of an institution. This too needs to be tackled in different ways that are appropriate to the context of each institution. But Catholic Studies can be launched on a less ambitious scale, and if it is successful, it can become a leaven and a resource to be employed with time in addressing some of the larger institutional challenges. Number 5, in particular, they offer a way of addressing the question of the continued presence of Catholic intellectuals on a faculty. We've all heard stories about how difficult it is in the present culture of academia, with its organizations into departments that bear the primary responsibility for conducting searches for open positions, to make the case for hiring a Catholic over a non-Catholic for a given position. We may look at 2 CVs and conclude that the 2 candidates, while each possessing different strengths, might equally be well qualified for a position. Then we go about the much more delicate task of trying to ascertain which of the candidates is Catholic, and then we try to make the case for preferring the Catholic candidate over another equally qualified one. Well, I'm firmly convinced that Catholic institutions have every right to adhere to a policy of affirmative action in recruiting and hiring Catholics in order to secure their mission, and that interpretations of employment law are erroneous, which suggest that Catholic institutions cannot prefer Catholic candidates for open positions. The reality is that many find this way of proceeding to be fraught with professional ambiguities and ultimately ineffective in securing the mission of the institution. A simple affirmative action program for the recruitment and hiring of Catholics is experienced as professionally embarrassing, because the notion that one candidate would be preferred over another simply because of her religious affiliation smacks of a kind of prejudicial treatment that is generally eschewed in American culture. And so even as we struggle to find a way of assuring our continued Catholicity, we feel a bit uncomfortable about choosing Professor X over Professor Y simply because Professor X is Catholic. And immediately the conversation goes to the question of what kind of Catholic he is. Is he a good Catholic? And if he's only a nominal Catholic, will his contribution to the religious vitality of the place be any greater than that of the devout Baptist or Muslim, or even the religious atheist whose personal witness is more informed and more compelling? And what will the mere fact of his being a Catholic contribute to the struggle to keep the Catholic tradition alive at an institution? Hiring the Catholic candidate merely because she is Catholic may do little or nothing to augment the Catholic mission and identity of the institution. Clearly, what is needed are not merely scholars who happen to be Catholic, but Catholic intellectuals. Women and men who find the work of integrating their faith and their intellectual lives and research interests to be a compelling task. Women and men who are, or who are committed to becoming, Catholic intellectuals. And if we want to build up the number of Catholic intellectuals at our institutions as a way of securing the Catholic culture in the institution on the academic side of the house, I would argue that the best strategy for doing so is to establish Catholic studies programs that have an explicit and clearly defined responsibility within the academic culture of the institution for promoting and fostering the study of Catholicism in all of its forms and manifestations. A Catholic studies program will give an institution a clear mandate for hiring Catholic intellectuals, who generally will be people steeped in the Catholic faith and thus capable of witnessing to it through the evangelical quality of their own lives. And if we have an interdisciplinary model whereby joint hires, say, between the English department and Catholic studies, history and Catholic studies, the finer performing arts and Catholic studies, physics and Catholic studies, psychology and Catholic studies, and so on, then we would not only have a faculty equipped to teach in a Catholic studies program, but one that is also equipped to serve as the intellectual stewards of the Catholic intellectual tradition at that institution, and if you will, as missionaries of that tradition among their non-Catholic peers in their discipline-based departments. So, for example, at my place, we have entire departments where there is not a single Catholic. And so all sorts of conversations go on there that are incredibly uninformed. If a given department had a Catholic studies scholar in that department as a possessing disciplinary expertise in whatever that department happens to be, English or history, basically you would have someone there who would be able to lift the veil of ignorance and help people better understand the Catholic tradition. The other idea that I have is this. I think some great university, maybe LMU, should initiate a postdoc year in the Catholic intellectual tradition. Let me explain what I mean. Another concept that would help to assure the continued viability of the Catholic intellectual tradition at historically Catholic colleges and universities would be the creation of a fully funded, year-long postdoctoral program in the Catholic intellectual tradition. The concept is that we would bring 15 or 20 scholars together with freshly minted doctorates in a wide diversity of fields and from a diversity of institutions, and they would come together for a full year of prayer, community, service, and scholarship, designed to inculcate in those young scholars the knowledge and the values that it would equip them to make a substantial contribution to the Catholic intellectual project at the institutions that would subsequently hire them. While most of the applicants to such a program would probably be Catholics themselves, the program would be open to anyone who demonstrated a serious interest in discerning a vocation to the ministry of Catholic higher education. Further, the program would partner with as many Catholic colleges and universities as express an interest in developing a career path for these young scholars, asking those institutions to make a commitment to a preferential hiring policy for scholars with the highly unique qualification of having done this postdoc year. So basically, it's kind of the idea of collegium, which I'm sure a lot of people in this room are familiar with. But collegium, as you know, can only scratch the surface in 5 or 6 days of dialogue. So the idea here would be a real immersion experience. I would envision the program looking something like this. Scholars living, number one, scholars living together in community in a residence hall or in a facility on or near a major Catholic college campus. Number two, daily opportunities, optional opportunities, for prayer, mass, and sacraments, and other religious forms of expression. 3, some courses in Catholic philosophy and theology. Number 4, seminars on every aspect of the Catholic intellectual tradition, the Church's contribution to spirituality, higher education, the natural sciences, theories of government and politics, art and architecture, music, morality, law, etc. 5, seminars in the fall term that would help those fellows develop a syllabus in their respective field that incorporates some themes and ideas from the Catholic intellectual tradition. So the English scholar who wants to develop a course on Flannery O'Connor or Walker Percy. The history scholar who maybe wants to teach a course on the controversy surrounding Pius XII and the Second World War. The psychology scholar who might want to teach a course on Carl Jung's writings about the Catholic Mass, the archetypes and the deeper symbolism of the Catholic liturgy. And you could go on and on and on. Someone in business who wants to teach a course on Catholic social teaching and its applicability to the business world. So, then, in the spring, those same fellows would have the opportunity to teach a course during that postdoctoral year based on the syllabus that they've designed in the fall. 7, seminars to help these budding Catholic intellectuals develop a scholarly article on the intersection between their discipline and the Catholic intellectual tradition. And 8, something I've been doing for a number of years now, a January experience in Rome, such as the one that I've been leading for undergraduates. We took 26 St. Mary's College undergrads to Rome for a 3-week immersion experience in January. Anyone who thinks that young people are not interested in the Catholic tradition has not met these 26 young people. Not only were they participating fully in everything we did, on their free time they were going out looking for other opportunities. Where's this church? Where's that church? Can we sing this song again? I mean, it was really amazing. As you can imagine, this year would be an extraordinarily rich immersion into the riches of the Catholic imagination, the Catholic approach to reality, and they would be designed to equip scholars with the background that would help them to make a real contribution to the challenges posed by our present reality. It would do for these young scholars what an novitiate year has historically done for young women and men embarking on consecrated life. And after all, those are the people whose presence we're trying to augment and in some places replace. I mean, that is, you think about the great Catholic intellectuals of the 20th century and how many of them were religious women and men. very often well-trained in their fields. Think about Sister Madeleine Wolfe at St. Mary's College at Notre Dame. And she was a great English scholar and a great poet. But she had that religious life foundation. And that is what is missing in terms of passing on the tradition, that experiential foundation that would help people to do the kinds of work now that people like Sister Madaleva did in the last century. These are just two constructive proposals that could be of great help to us in assuring that the Catholic intellectual tradition continues to hold pride of place at historically Catholic institutions. Assuring the future of the tradition at our institutions is a sacred task that has been entrusted to those of us who know the tradition and who recognize that it is endangered, and we have an obligation to respond. As Catholic educators and as educators from other faith traditions and none teaching at Catholic universities, we have an obligation to contribute to the Catholic intellectual project and what it can offer to the formation of healthy, happy, flourishing human beings. As Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI said to Catholic educators on his apostolic visit to the United States in 2008, quote, "Intellectual charity calls the educator to recognize that the profound responsibility to lead the young to truth is nothing less than an act of love. Indeed, the dignity of education lies in fostering the true perfection and happiness of those to be educated. In practice, intellectual charity upholds the essential unity of knowledge against the fragmentation which ensues when reason is detached from the pursuit of truth. It guides the young toward the deep satisfaction of exercising freedom in relation to truth, and it strives to articulate the relationship between faith and all aspects of family and civic life. Once their passion for the fullness and unity of truth has been awakened, young people will surely relish the discovery that the question of what they can know opens up the vast adventure of what they ought to do. Here they will experience in what and in whom it is possible to hope, and be inspired to contribute to society in a way that engenders hope in others." Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least is Debra Mooney. You've done a lot, so I'm gonna shorten your bio just slightly.
Please.
Debra is the assistant to the president for Mission and Identity and chief mission officer at Xavier University. There, she's responsible for promoting active engagement with the campus community and carrying out Xavier University's mission as a great Jesuit and Catholic institution through the Center for Mission and Identity. And within that institution is the Ruth J. and Robert A. Conway Institute for Jesuit Education, for which she also serves as the founding director. Debra is also a licensed clinical psychologist and came to Xavier in 1999 to serve as university wellness coordinator and has served in many different leadership capacities throughout the years until today. She's presenting a paper entitled "A Fifth Essential Characteristic of Today's Catholic University."
Thank you. Well, with all due respect to Paul, this might be the favored spot of the day, the one right before the reception. We'll see. And I'm not going to tell jokes like he did. Instead, I'm going to engage all of you. So as a psychologist here, I am not going to be offering a thesis or an essay, but instead I'm going to be sharing the results of an exercise I have offered to over 100 faculty, staff, administrators, trustees, and mission officers of the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities. And it's really a way to begin engaging people in a discussion on Ex Corde Ecclesiae. So I'm going to start by showing simply what it is that I do around Ex Corde that begins that discussion. And you'll see how rather simple it is. So since most of the people, well, let's see here, perfect. Since most of the people that I engage with this are not familiar with Ex Corde, I simply give an overview just like this. It's a document that was promulgated by Pope John Paul II in 1990. It means from the heart of the church, and it identifies characteristics of a Catholic university. And I'll remind them, if I were to do it today, I would say it's been 28 years since a Pope has said, what is Catholic about a Catholic university? It's a 20-page, single-spaced document, but it can really be boiled down into one paragraph that is the most commonly cited paragraph because it succinctly talks about the 4 essential characteristics. I'm going to pass this out. They would all have this as well. Thank you. And I go through the bulleted, the bolded points: the Christian inspiration, reflection on research and a growing treasury of human knowledge, being faithful to the Christian message, and a commitment, service to the meaning of life. Then I'd invite them, like I'm going to invite you now, to take a minute to imagine if you were asked to add a 5th essential characteristic, what would you add? If Pope Francis said he wanted to update Ex Corde Ecclesiae today, what theme would you suggest? You don't have to worry about wordsmithing it. Just write down, what would the topic be? What would the theme be? Another more minute, one more minute. Okay, now as we prepare to go to the reception, I'm going to invite you to turn to someone near you, especially if there's someone near you that you haven't met, so it might be the person behind you or in front of you. Pair up and share your theme.
I'm down. I'm gonna be
Life was down with Jesuit value, care for me. Which I think is probably explicit.
Yeah, I mean, my mind often goes to something like human dignity
Something about engaging, like, diversity
service of the people of God. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, but I would probably want to expand it.
explicitly overlooking.
But I feel like
A lot of the other things I want to see there.
Sorry.
A lot of the other things I want to see there. So the 4th one is being remembered for the meaning of life. Whereas I think one about service to the common good, to demonize that a little bit.
So, so it's like, as a great engineer, research,
One more minute, make sure everyone's had a chance to share. Okay, why don't we go ahead and regather. I have been, as I said, gathering these responses, and I have found that they cluster into 5 areas, 6 if you count other. There is an other, and I'll share it when we get there. When I do this, when I go through each of them, I'm going to invite you to think about what category you would put yours in, and maybe the person that you shared as well. So, the first 2 are in the high 20 percentages. So the first one is at 28%, and they have to do with action, activism, and service. It's walking the walk. I think of this one as the Nike, just do it. Or head, heart, and hand, it is the hands. So it's community engagement, civic engagement, activity, activism, community outreach, you get it. Action, hands. Close at 26% is the second category, and it has to do with diversity and inclusion. And within this category, I've noticed that there's kind of 2 clusters as well. So just as the first one says an institution that is inclusive of race, color, origin, religion, origin and a religion, it has to do with making sure that the institution itself is diverse. Another type of diversity and inclusion response are those that are educating for the value of diversity and inclusion. But I put them both under the same category at 26%. The next 2 are in the high teens. So we've had 28%, 26%. The next one is academic culture and atmosphere at 17%. These relate to something pulled out specifically about education. In fact, someone even wrote education. They just didn't feel like Ex-Corte had enough about educating. So these relate to hiring, as you see the one up there, professional development, hiring for mission or professional development around mission, the intersection of faith and reason. Another theme within this one would be the relationship of faculty with staff. Some talk about maybe even having it called out as a sacramental relationship, care for students. You get the idea. Academic culture and atmosphere. Then at 16%, so that was 17%, this is 16% character development. So moral character, as you see up there, integrity, virtuosity, humility, humbleness, listening, empathy, a lot of the what we would call soft skills, but as a psychologist, we know the soft skills are the difficult skills. And then at 12% is calling out something, again, specifically around Catholic faith, values, or charism. So preferential option for the poor would be this, something around Nostra Aetate, the importance of interreligious dialogue, fidelity to the founding charism, evangelization, religious development. I think I put into these categories. So the other, one person did put a very specific other, and it was, I wouldn't add a 5th. And they gave a reason, so it wasn't just I didn't want to do the assignment. It was because it would water down the first 4. So I like that. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So this is what it looks like in the pie chart. So I'm curious, let's just see the room by hand. So raise your hand if you would have categorized yours as activism or service or action. Okay. How about the next one, diversity and inclusion? I see that some hands go up for both of them. These are tough, aren't they? Because I really did have to look at all of them so I could be consistent. How about academic culture? We are really split. I've been surprised really how much this pie chart looks similar, and it looks like even this room more so. Catholic value.
You skipped character development.
Character development, thank you. And any others? Do I have another one to add to the other example? Okay.
I found mine was kind of split between the first one and the fifth one, depending on how you frame certain things.
What was yours?
Like, you know, it was something like like I was using Pope Francis' language of the church, which goes forth. You know, so it's sort of like activism, but it's also sort of like this option for the poor Catholic, you know, depending how you frame it.
Yes. Yeah.
And mine was the same. It was engagement with the great problems of the age in light of the gospel message.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well, this is, yeah.
And I said something along the lines of the importance of community building, which may fit in, I don't know, diversity and inclusion or action and service. Because the way I see things, the world is becoming a place where people are more and more isolated. It's just getting worse all the time.
Yes.
You know, with all the electronic devices that we have,
Yes.
we don't have to connect with people at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially once you leave college.
Yeah.
So I think the value of community is it's got many values, but it's you know the place where we develop our faith.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I'm trying to imagine if that was sitting there in front of me and I was putting what category I would have put it. What category did you think it was under?
Me?
Yeah.
None.
I would think character development, but I don't know. What would someone else say?
Academic culture.
It could be academic culture, yeah. That was.
Well, yeah, but so you know you don't have to develop character or culture or anything if you're by yourself with yourself wherever you're right. So that's what I think is really important, is to get people out of that, if possible.
Got it.
Yeah. I had the same kind of thought. I thought for me it was the body of Christ. That was my image. But that was kind of a location. That was a community first and last. Right? You know, no one shows up alone type thing. So, you know, but it's unfinished.
Yeah. Yeah, Dan.
This might be an other, or it might be academic. It has to do with primary importance given to creating a group of scholars who are going to help the church think. That is to say, do the thinking about culture, about God, about secularization, all of these things.
Yes. That one might also fit under Catholic value as well, right? So I actually looked at groups within to see if something rose. I didn't notice at the time when I'm doing various groups. This has been over a year and a half. So we'll start with faculty. Which one do you think kind of rose amongst faculty?
Academic culture.
Wrong. Diversity and inclusion, especially the education for diversity and inclusion. Quite strong. How about mission officers of the ACCU? Say it loud. Academic culture.
Really?
Ah. Trustees. We're pretty evenly divided. From the ones that I choose, we're obviously Xavier trustees. Between academic culture and character development. So I'm going to put this in a context as I end here. In 2000, Father Professor Anthony Dosen published an article, and it was titled Catholic Identity and the Challenges of Ex Corde Ecclesiae. And he was really looking at how educators, how people working at Catholic universities viewed Catholic identity. And he thought of it as looking through lenses. He talked about different ways, he describes different ways we can think about Catholic identity. And he argued that people in the 80s and 90s, again this was published in 2000, so those in the 80s and 90s, saw it as what he called an interpretive lens, which he described as a lived experience in the current moment. And he cited someone who had done a similar thing, looking at how educators viewed Catholicity. And you'll see that up there, or Catholic identity. And it was really Catholicity with a small c. This wouldn't surprise you. But that was described as expressions of academic quality, respect for people, caring for people, and reaching out to the underprivileged. And I think about those results that just came in and that we talked about here for a few minutes, and they really are the same. So educators in the 80s and the 90s are no different than right now. He wrote this, not surprising, because of the tensions when Ex Corde first came out, and especially the application, the mandatum, and how probably one of the ways, and I should say that Ex Corde was, and he would argue that Ex Corde then was written not from a interpretive lens, but rather from his definition would be a functional or legislative lens, or a proscriptive, we might say, lens. And that's why the communication was complicated in the tensions. And that maybe what we did instead of engaging in it to reduce tensions in our areas is we just stopped talking about it. Enough that now many people on our campuses have never heard of it, as we know. So I offer this as a simple exercise to help people re-engage or engage with Ex Corde Ecclesiae, but more importantly, to think about Catholic identity, and even more importantly, to think about their role at a Catholic university today.
Thank you to all of our wonderful presenters, and for this historian, I want to compliment your wonderful concreteness. We historians love concrete details. So sometimes I have trouble with my theological brothers in Treasury. So we have a diversity of overlapping, a diversity of papers, but some very concrete overlapping themes, some concrete manifestations of how Catholic identity is being lived out at one place, Sacred Heart University, some concrete proposals on how to live out Catholic identity more tangibly at all Catholic universities, and then some data and new ways of engaging with Catholic identity going forward and rooted in Ex Corde Ecclesiae. So we have about 15 minutes, and I wanted to give our panelists some time to respond to one another, to engage in some conversation with one another, and then also to have some time for our panelists to engage with the audience. So with that, I'll turn it over to our panelists.
For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to speak as myself here. But as someone who has been engaged, has been part of the Catholic Studies department at Sacred Heart virtually since its founding, who has, I think I'm probably tied for the most sections taught of our seminars, if not in the lead. So I have a lot of experience with what we're doing. So, but I want to think in terms of some of what David was talking about, because I'm sort of interested in hearing what David has to say about how, because I hear David's proposal as talking about a Catholic Studies program that sounds to me kind of like a major or a minor. I want to think about that in relation to what we're doing, which is, I mean, we use the name Catholic Studies, but it is very much what David is talking about as an interdisciplinary program of engaging Catholic texts and ideas across disciplines, but as a core program. So I see our program doing some of the things that David is looking for, maybe on a less formal level in certain ways, just because we're dealing with core courses where we have students who we're very much trying to engage with the material and with the seminar pedagogy and all that, in addition to trying to get them thinking seriously. So there are different kind of things we're doing versus majors and minors who are kind of already coming in very enthusiastic. So I'd be interested to hear, further, some of David's thoughts about how, what Michelle's paper talks about relates to some of his proposals.
Well, I would say I think your concept is great. I mean, I think the whole core curriculum idea and the seminar idea, that's a great way of doing it. And, in my proposals, I'm not suggesting that those models, that one size fits all, or that those models would hold at every institution. At my institution, we would have a very difficult time implementing something like this. Mm-hmm. We have a seminar program, but it isn't driven by the Catholic intellectual tradition. And there would be enormous resistance to putting more Catholic authors in that seminar program. The way I was envisioning Catholic studies was that it would be a major or a minor, but what really interests me about it is the possibility that it holds for sort of seeding Catholic intellectuals all over the university. Because it wouldn't be, people wouldn't be hired to be inside the Department of Catholic Studies. They would be joint hires. So you'd be hiring an English scholar with some funding from Catholic Studies to participate in Catholic Studies, but she would also teach in the English department. So it was I saw it as a way to try to break down silos.
That's very good.
I was actually going to ask, in the workshops, the pedagogical workshops in preparation, is there discussion about difficult and challenging conversations that come up when it's free-flowing like that?
Yes, that does come up. I mean, increasingly, especially as more and more of us who are presenting at these workshops have a lot of experience in the classrooms with the seminars. You know, when I first came through the program, we were still just kind of starting to implement. So there had been I came in the second semester as an adjunct before coming full-time, and we'd only had one cohort of students come through. We had 5 test sections the first semester, then the second semester we had more. So that we were still kind of getting the hang of how our students were going to react to things. I think now, you know, having been through it, this is something we would definitely want to talk about. It. Some of it with our students, I find, is, and this would be different at other schools, but with our students in particular, you know, our students, for example, are by and large a very white student body, a student body that wouldn't necessarily be very sensitively engaged and would need some walking along to be sensitively engaged with certain cultural topics that they ought to be, is finding ways to get them to engage on these questions and finding ways to open up questions for them and let conversation flow, and particularly of letting tense moments happen and happen charitably. You know, I just had an experience in the classroom yesterday where we were talking about Flannery O'Connor's story, Everything That Rises Must Converge. And we were talking about, I believe we were talking about the mother character, Julian's mother. You've read the story, right? She's someone with sort of unreconstructed Southern racial views and all this. And one of my students came out with a fairly typical line of thinking that I hear from students, which is kind of like, well, that was her background, you know, how can you really judge this and whatever, how can you question her background? Another student came up fairly sharply but charitably and said, well, I think we can. I think, you know, I think that this is, you know, what she's saying here is wrong. We have to call this out. And, you know, another couple of students got it, you know, but it was a nice kind of charitable bringing to bear of a fairly sharp disagreement about, and a student, and I was impressed that the one student, who is good at being a little provocative in class, and it helps to have some students like that, but the one student was able to come out and disagree with his colleague, his peer. I was happy about that because that's the kind of atmosphere we're trying to create where people aren't afraid to disagree on a really important issue, where it's not, you know, you're not, you know, calling somebody a name, you're not, you know, impugning their character for saying that they're wrong on this issue, but you're willing to do that. And I was happy about that.
And it's an important skill that we need today.
Yeah.
Please.
So I'm so interested that you ended, Debra, with this slide on Catholicity, because when you put up what people had said with the different characteristics, one of the things I thought, whenever I see inclusion and diversity and that kind of language, and that should be our, you know, the defining characteristic of the Catholic institution, as an institution, I was thinking maybe we should rephrase that in terms of Catholicity, because the inclusion and diversity are secular language, and a way of saying unless we are a small c Catholic, unless we are changed by, not in the sense of doing these things for, you know, the marginalized, but unless we are changed by our encounters with the entire world, that we're not really truly going to be, in any good sense, Catholic. So there could be some language that we could use, I think, sometimes. But I have to ask you, so what would you say the characteristics should be?
Oh, no. Well, okay, my personal answer, and I would never do a paper on it. You know, I'm a psychologist, so I collect data and I share it. I don't, but mine is character development. I think, yeah.
I'm gonna do a circuit to this route to throw another bomb into the conversation. Debra, your exercise had me thinking about, and I forget the name of this. It was a Roman document out of the Jesuits talking about educating for justice in our schools, and they listed some categories. Said, yeah, we got a moral formation of our students. Our research needs to promote justice, but our institutions themselves need to be just. So I had that in mind when I was thinking, well, maybe there's something similar. One of the characteristics is how we govern it ourselves. Because I was thinking about this ahead of time, listening to the other two papers, and so this is where I'm going to be the resident contrarian again. I come from a pretty lean school, and so we don't have money to throw around for mission too often. I think one of the problems with money is you solve problems by spending it. And so we tend to think that our way towards mission is by developing programs, and we trust programs to carry the mission because they're attractive, they gather attention and things, and that lets us off the hook of kind of doing this deeper, down to the bones sort of work. I'm worried that no program, no matter how good, is going to save Catholic higher education. I think programs sometimes become a distraction from that deeper work, and so how do we get there? I think is kind of one of the places that I'm leaving with today.
Well, I would just say that dialogue doesn't cost anything, and maybe it's more of a resource on time. Like just even now talking about a fifth characteristic, there's no right answer. And so that's what's nice about this. And just think about how engaging this was as a simple thing to do. And so I would agree. Oftentimes we can ask questions and say, if money weren't an issue, what would you do about blah, blah, blah? And people are still silent. It's not about money. It's about how we do things. And so thinking deeply, we do have opportunities at universities to think deeply about things. And especially when you take the pressure off of a right or wrong answer.
I think some of it comes down to what you expect programs to do. So, the program that Michelle's paper is describing, for example, is a student-centered program. It's a much a Catholic Studies program as a core curriculum class that tries to engage integratively for the students. But that's in conjunction with other faculty programming, and some of this will come up tomorrow in the panel about higher education. Things such as what you described this morning. So we have, for only the first year of faculty required conversations about the Catholic Middle. So there's sort of student and faculty engagement on these issues. But yeah, I think you're right that one program can't be leaned on too heavily. But a program can't be the solution, but it can be part of a broader holistic approach. I think it gives you something to coalesce around. And again, in this case, this is something that all of our students are experiencing, and all of them are trying to build kind of a common frame of questions and meaning and all this for the students, even as we try to do similar things for faculty.
And I really appreciate your caution about this idea that, we've got a program and that will solve the problem. And I'd like to ask you how you would address this whole question. I mean, I think you're right.
I see what you're on to.
I think you're right that programs aren't the answer to everything. I think they can help, but I very much appreciate what you're talking about, which goes to it sounds to me like it goes to the level of a much deeper conversion, and how we can set up the conditions whereby that can happen for people, but we can't make it happen. I mean, we can't prescribe it. So what are some things you would recommend?
That's not fair.
I'm very genuine.
Sure. Yeah. We were having a conversation earlier. I think it goes to the structures of the institution itself. So not. The deepest sense of who we are when we, our way of proceeding, when it's time to set a budget, when it's time to, so that it's not simply we have resources available for those who want it, but these core foundational aspects of who we are, how does it get entrenched there? And,
so it's not just tacked on.
Well, yeah.
And it really has to do with formation of administrators and
But what about
decision makers.
What about salary structures that are, things like that? More uniform, more egalitarian, or just or fair. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about too?
Well, I would be in complete agreement with you.
Yeah.
Ken Garcia, University of Notre Dame. I think in reference to Daniel's comment, I think strong visionary leadership, visionary leaders with backbone are necessary for it to happen. I mean, yes, we can have programs that will do some good things, but you have to have the kind of leadership that's going to see it through and make sure that the allocations are made in the proper place. But but what I wanted to ask, and this is specifically for you, David, I love your idea of the postdoctoral year for new faculty members.
Talk to Father Jenkins. I wrote to him about it
10
years ago, and he never answered my letter.
Yeah, I have.
And he has the money.
I know. I've been pushing that for about 16 years at Notre Dame, to no avail. But what worries me about that, so let's say it gets started. So you have these faculty members who are in Catholic Studies and English, Catholic Studies and Biology, and so forth, and they have joint appointments. I know what happened to my institution is that the department colleagues in biology and English and physics, sociology would resent them, would possibly ostracize them as all just affirmative action hires. Yeah. They're not real scholars like the rest of us are, because they're doing this other thing. And so I worry about, especially younger faculty members, would they even get tenure? In my university, they probably would not. Yeah. Now, maybe at a 4-year liberal arts college, maybe that's a different thing, but that worries me a lot. And so what I've even pushed at my university, okay, let's do this for just associate professors, because we don't want to destroy an assistant professor's chance of getting tenure. So.
Just to be clear, I didn't see the two proposals as necessarily linked. I mean, the proposal about a postdoc year, that could be someone going into any Catholic university in any department. I didn't mean to imply that person would necessarily go to a school and have a joint appointment. Although, I mean, the two models could be brought together in some way. But I understand what you're saying. I mean, at my place, not to tell too many tales out of school, but at my place, someone who applied to the English department who was a Catholic intellectual, and that would show in their vita because she's writing about Flannery O'Connor or whatever, that person would never, ever get past the first cut. So administrators would never even know that such a person was out there or that such a person had applied. Because what these departments do is replicate themselves. So the scholars in a given department only want to hire other people like themselves. So it's all about deconstruction and all of those things. Not that those things don't have value. I'm not saying that, but the idea that someone might actually come in with a different research agenda would be very much resisted. As long as the person could be Catholic, as long as that doesn't enter into their public persona in any way, as long as they conceal that, and they're doing the same kind of work as everyone else in the department, they would be welcomed.
I think we have time maybe for one more question, but before we do, I'd just like to remind everyone that we can continue this conversation outside. There's a reception out there on what we call the Breezeway or Skyway or something, and I have no idea. I wouldn't be a good Jesuit, if I wasn't privileged to make this announcement that outside, kind of in the corner over here, out on the balcony, that's where the bar is. So with that, let's have a concluding question, and we'll then retire to the reception.
Thank you. I agree with you on your prospective English scholar, and the sad part is that her classes would fill up.
Yeah.
But yes. my question is a kind of picking up where Ken kind of left off a little bit, and that's what I think we all laud interdisciplinarity. It's the greatest thing ever, right? But there's no quarter for it. You really can't get tenured in it very easily. It's really kind of it's kind of speaking out of both sides of the mouth. And if you are a young scholar who's kind of drank the Kool-Aid and who is deeply trained in every one of your disciplines and interdisciplinarity, which is the key point, because otherwise you're just hiring like a cross-disciplinary person, a Catholic English scholar, but are they interdisciplinary? Are they trained? So this is what I'm seeing all the time. There's a whole kind of crop of scholars who are kind of the island of misfit toys. They have no place to go. And so I think that's just kind of part of the conversation as well.
I guess what I was thinking of was a scholar who has really good credentials in her field, in English, a really good pedigree, but whose research interests happen to be happen to intersect with the Catholic tradition.
And the replication thing is exactly, because there's very few of the Catholic literary tradition happening, so there's not really any replication. And the mimetic magic, is very, that mimetic karate is very strong. So, it's hard to beat that. So, agreed.
Thank you very much. Let's thank our panelists.